All right. Let's see. Give it a couple minutes for people to come in. All right, everybody. All right. We are live. This is Jack Murphy. I am Jack Murphy. This is the Jack Murphy Live podcast. And today we have a very special guest. We have Joe Kent. He is a congressional candidate in Washington State, a American hero, and an all-around good guy. Joe, I'm so happy to have you on the show. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on. Excited to be here.
Yeah, fantastic. You know, like many other people, I first discovered you by seeing a very powerful video that you produced. And it really told a lot about your story and your mission and what you're all about. So why don't we start there? Joe, give us a little bit of background. Tell us about that video. Get us started. We're going to have a nice long conversation. We're going to cover a lot of ground, but let's get started with the backstory, Joe. Who are you, buddy? And why are we interested in Joe Kent today?
All right. Yeah, definitely. So I grew up right here in the Pacific Northwest, born in a little logging town called Sweet Home, Oregon. Lived there while my folks were working for the Forest Service and putting themselves through college. After that, we moved up to Portland, Oregon, which most people know as nowadays as the hotbed of Antifa and anarchy and far leftist ideology. But in the 80s and 90s, it was kind of a small, growing, great mix between the suburbs and a growing city. So I had an amazing childhood there. My parents were absolutely wonderful and supportive of everything I was doing. I'm from a pretty big family. I got two little brothers, two little sisters. Um, really involved in Boy Scouts growing up. As far back as I can remember, when people were like, "Hey, what do you want to be when you grow up?" My first answer was Army man, GI Joe, Commando, something along those lines. I never had any desire to do anything else. So it started out kind of as a little boy fantasy, but then got more realistic as I got into school and read history and saw how there was always a generation. In every generation, there was a group of warriors that went out and defended our way of life in our country. They either did it here at home during the Revolutionary War, during the Civil War, and then we started going abroad to fight evil throughout the world. So that really inspired me.
Let's drill down on that one for a second. Let's drill down on the Boy Scouts, because Boy Scouts is something
Yeah.
that's very important to me, even though I didn't grow up a Boy Scout, but I can see today the very strong need for it. And unfortunately, there's not even Boy Scouts as we knew it. Tell me about the power of the Boy Scout experience in your life. Like, what did you learn from it? How did it inspire you? What value did you see it giving you in your life? And do you see relevance for that today still?
Man, there's such a need for it right now. I think there's a huge gap in our culture for strong young men because the whole narrative that masculinity and male leadership is somehow toxic has just become so pervasive in our society. And so I think there's this huge void right now. There's a hunger for it. So I just got really lucky with the Boy Scout troop and the Boy Scout community that I was a part of. So we had a couple really strong leaders, two of whom were veterans. One was a Vietnam era Green Beret, which I think helped kind of shape what I wanted to be when I grew up. But really, what they did was they empowered the older boys to take charge of the younger boys, and so it was almost military like, which is kind of how Boy Scouts is designed to be, going back to when it first started in England. But they really let young boys go out in the woods and do little boy stuff, and then they were supervised by teenage boys and older boys. And pretty much, we learned all the great stuff about duty and responsibility and being trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, and kind, and all that stuff beat into our heads. But really, it just provided this outlet for little boys to go out in the woods and be little savages. And they were supervised by other guys who were just a little bit older, but they knew they had their responsibility. And so it just gave us the room to grow and mature as young men, and really look up to older boys who were not necessarily going down a bad path in life, but who were, positive, and because they had the responsibility to go out and to take care of the younger kids and to show them the right way. It just built this great community of young men supervised by other young men, supervised by adult men who really cared deeply about each other. And the adults that were involved in it, they were from all different walks of life. Some were veterans, super masculine, super macho guys. Other guys were just regular dads that worked in an office and cared and wanted their sons to go out and be part of a positive environment. And you put them all together, and this amazing community of accountability and responsibility just kind of blossoms and blooms. And so I just had the greatest experience in the world in Boy Scouts, and I I think it really set the foundation for my life.
Yeah, and I can see that, and it was funny to hear you recite the creed. You
Yeah,
memorized that very early on.
right.
But the key values that you brought up of like personal accountability and independence and achievement and mastery and education and leadership. These are things that are getting crapped on all over the place these days. You said it very early on when you said that masculinity is under attack. There's no question about that. And with your experience with Boy Scouts, and now there's not even Boy Scouts anymore. It's called Boy Scouts of America, and it's not single sex. And even the Girl Scouts homepage, last time I checked, said right on there, science shows us that single sex education for kids is, fantastic, and it helps them learn and grow in ways that they can't in a co-ed environment. Right there on the
Yeah,
Girl Scouts page. And then you go to the BSA and anybody can join, and there's not a Boy Scouts for just Boy Scouts anymore. So my question to you, sir, and we're jumping ahead wildly because that's what we do. Uh,
yeah.
my question to you, sir, is if you were to win your race in Congress and become another version of a public servant, we'll talk about it, but already given quite a bit of your life to service. Uh, what would you do to defend masculine spaces?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's hard from like the federal perspective for the federal government to come in, but I do think we need the equality to push back on things like the Equality Act that are just so radical that are trying to manipulate the actual definitions of what gender is, because I think there's a huge agenda there that's just trying to get more and more control over people's lives. Because if you can break down the family unit, you can break down language, then you can exert complete and total control over people. And that's what I think is at the heart of all this critical race theory, toxic masculinity, 1619. I think that's really all about control. So pushing back on all of that, I think we just have to be unapologetic about and not be bullied. And when people call us racist or they call us sexist or whatever they're going to throw at us, we just have to know that that's coming and then present our case, present our arguments, and be unashamed about it. There's nothing wrong with having Boy Scouts be for Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts be for Girl Scouts. This has been common sense for generations. This is stuff that our grandparents would laugh at that we're even having this debate because they just intuitively knew that this was the best way to educate. So I think conservatives need to get much better about defending our culture. And I think we're actually going to draw more people over to our side when we defend our culture and we just don't let it be assaulted by all these false narratives that are destroying our country.
Indeed. Well, the narratives are literally specifically designed to destroy the country. They're designed to destroy all barriers. They're designed to destroy all identities, actually. And the notion that CRT has of two queer things, which is to blur the boundaries, to blur the distinctions, so that everybody becomes everything and therefore nobody is anything. And that is all part of breaking down the system of support that builds strong families, strong communities, and strong nations. There's no question about that. And I see the Boy Scouts as an essential part of that. And that's why I do a lot of the work that I do in the Liminal Order. We're kind of like man scouts, kind of like give people a chance to build skills and community with people who share their common values. And it is certainly something that we believe is an antidote to what's happening. It's certainly not the only answer, but men getting together to build male spaces, to support each other in a masculine way, to come together, work as brothers, to increase their sovereignty. That's what we're all about in Liminal Order. And so when I hear video like yours and I read up on your positions and I hear these things you're saying right off the bat, man, it's very exciting to me to actually talk to a legitimate congressional candidate, somebody who could be serving in the House of Representatives, who understands the landscape, man. And like we have just begun to talk, but I can already tell that we're going to see some of the things the same way. So let's keep going. Boy Scouts were a huge influence on you growing up. They drew you towards a life of service, cowboys and Indians kind of stuff. Tell us about that, how that evolved, let's get into your career there.
Yeah, so I mean, eventually, as you get a little bit older, you have to make some serious plans. So I started bothering the military recruiters from the time I was like 15 on, being like, "Hey, I read this World War II story where guys enlisted when they're 16. Can I do that?" And they're like, "No, kid, you have to finish high school." So, but around that same time, the Mogadishu Black Hawk Down incident happened in '93. I was 13 years old when that happened, and cable news was just becoming a thing. But that was really one of the big first televised, I think, military incursions that happened with the cable news network. The Gulf War happened a little bit before that, but that was like, hey, look at our smart bombs and how this all looks like a video game. Whereas Mogadishu there was a day-long brutal firefight where we lost 30 soldiers. Some of their bodies got drugged through the streets by these terrorists. And I was like, this is absolutely crazy. This is happening right now. We live back here in peace and enjoy America, but there's these guys who are just a little bit older than me that are out here, out there in Somalia fighting against terrorism and against evil. How do I go do that? And the recruiters were like, well, hey, those guys are Army Rangers, and if you enlist, you can go become an infantryman, and then you can try out for a Ranger regiment. So when I was 18 years old, I did just that, enlisted in the Army as an infantryman, and got a shot to try out for a Ranger regiment. Ended up right there, and this is like 98 to 2001. Around 2001, I decided to try out for Special Forces, and so I was actually in Special Forces selection, the program they put you through to see if you can make it through the first step. That's when 9/11 happened. So that's kind of when the Army changed and the whole world changed.
Yeah. How old are you?
I'm 41.
41. Okay. So we're the same age, same generation. We're in high school together at the same time. So I understand how 9/11 was such a huge impact on me. It completely changed my life. I wasn't even in the military. I had been studying Latin America. And it was like the hot place, right? All through the 90s, we were turning our attention towards the Americas. And right as we're wrapping up, I mean, 9/11 happened, and our instructor was like, well, that's the end of Latin America studies. And it's all going to be about the Middle East from now on. And it sure has been. So 9/11 happens. What do? You just shoot your hand straight up in the air?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I was already in Special Forces selection. I mean, so I already kind of volunteered. Special Forces is kind of a long pipeline. It takes a while to become an actual Green Beret. So I had about a year and a half of training ahead of me. And in that time frame, so it's funny because in the 90s when you went in, there was a handful of guys that had tasted combat either in 93 in Mogadishu or these little incursions at the Gulf War, Panama, Grenada. So they were kind of like unicorns when I came in, seeing guys that had combat experience. And they all had this one shot at combat in their careers, essentially. And then 9/11 happened. So a bunch of us thought, like, hey, if you weren't on that first push that went into Afghanistan, man, you just missed the boat for the next 10, 20 years. Because it's funny to say now because we've been at war now constantly for 20 years. But at the time, I was stressed out because I was in the Special Forces qualification course, worried about passing. But at the same time, I'm like, did I just miss my generation's Panama or Grenada or whatever? So I eventually ended up in Iraq right after the invasion of Iraq, and quickly found out that I didn't miss the boat at all, and that this thing was going to keep going for quite a while. So got to my first Special Forces team. They had just gotten back from the invasion of Iraq, and they were like, hey, rest assured, we're going back in like 2 months because this thing is just heating up. So I think some of the guys that had been around the block for a while kind of just intuitively knew that there was an insurgency brewing that we would have to attempt to take care of.
An insurgency brewing is an understatement for sure.
Right.
Let's talk about your training. I know they throw a lot at you, and I know the system is grueling and brutal, but is there something that stands with you still to this day, like something that you learned or a process that you went through or some experience, something that you've taken from that, which was all those years ago, 20 years ago now? Is there something from that still informs the way that you handle your life, your business, your campaign, your family?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, in the special operations training, I think a lot of people think of doing very physical tasks, the guys running around with big, heavy backpacks on through the woods or running around with the boats and logs over their head and all that. And there's definitely a huge aspect of that. A lot of that's mental. You kind of figure out that, hey, this is going to suck. It's going to end at some point. I just need to put my head down and get it done. There's physical preparation you can do and all that. But for me, the culmination of special forces training and Green Berets are designed to go in behind enemy lines, work with local forces to either go after terrorists or to overthrow a government. So our final phase of our training is called Robin Sage, and we essentially go into a community in rural North Carolina, and it's sort of live action play. They have some role players there that play the roles of guerrilla leaders, and then we legitimately train up guerrilla forces from the local community. So people that have nothing to do with the military that we give guns to, they have blanks and all that. It's not real, but it's as close to real as you can. So it's a very dynamic situation where you're always doing something sort of wrong. It's controlled chaos. And in that, to make it through and to not lose your mind, you have to be really comfortable with being uncomfortable, which is almost a cliche nowadays. But it kind of gives you a really good crash course in the management of absolute chaos. So I still really fall back on a lot of that training I had. It was the best, most eye-opening training that I ever had. That really prepared me for some of the situations that got put in overseas. So yeah, I fall back on that. Hey, it may seem like things are falling apart right now, especially being a new politician, having to balance a whole bunch of different things that I've never done before. I'm lucky that I have something like Robin Sage and Special Forces training in my toolbox, because this isn't the first time I've been like, okay, well, what do I do now? Intuitively, I just need to follow my gut and then make sure I'm covered in some of these areas. And the biggest thing is don't lose your head. So
Yeah.
that's kind of some of the big takeaways I got.
Interesting. Interesting. So I was not in the military. I am not a military specialist, but I do dabble. I stayed at a Holiday Inn and I talked to lots of smart guys, lots of officers, lots of authors, analysts. Whoa. Oh man, I just broke the mic in the middle of this. So I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to toss it to you. Live TV, guys. This is how it works. My question to you is that in the Liminal Order, we've been studying fourth generation warfare quite a bit, and because we think it's a valuable model to understand the world that we live in. And one of the key components that we've discovered is that the light infantry is the key to fighting a fourth generation war. And you're telling me about how your training has set you up to go behind enemy lines, to interact with the locals, to do all kinds of stuff that is, I think, in the same vein as 4G, as we learned it reading Boyd and Lind and their experiences in Iraq. To what extent is that training sort of informing your idea of how the military should work today in the United States? Like, what lessons did you take from Iraq? For example, in the book, they discovered, that if you just, smash and level, whole towns, you end up with a worse situation than you had in the first place. You've built all kinds of new insurgents, and you're losing the moral strategic quadrant. Right. And so they discovered, hey, well, let's do all these other tactics. Let's mix in with the locals. Let's use local operators to take care of business. Let's do things quietly. How is that going to inform the way that you see the role of the United States military moving forward? Are we structured in the right way? Are we thinking strategically the right way? How does your direct personal experience translate into your ideas for the future of the military in the United States?
I think overall, we can always change tactics. We can always come up with new procedures. But the biggest thing I think that the United States military needs from especially its political leadership, is actual clear-cut guidance. Tell us exactly why we are in these places and what do you hope to accomplish. I mean, we went into the global war on terror with the objective that, hey, we just need to go get rid of these Al Qaeda guys because they attacked us on 9/11. Very clear cut. Anyone can understand that. But shortly thereafter, we deviated into these really ill-defined regime change and then nation building that became counterinsurgency, because nobody could ever really say, hey, this is exactly what we want out of this place, and this is what it needs to look like when you're done. Instead, there was this false narrative, especially in Iraq, that there was these massive, obviously, weapons of mass destruction, but then there was these huge links to Al Qaeda, and somehow everybody that was affiliated with Saddam's regime was therefore linked to Al Qaeda. So if we just get rid of these guys from Saddam's regime, we run them down, we smash them, then suddenly we're going to wake up one morning and Jeffersonian democracy is going to flourish and Iraq is going to become Switzerland and they're going to sell us oil and it's going to be great. And I don't think anybody ever really believed that. But because that narrative had been sold and it was so persuasive between the political class and the media, the military's left there like, okay, well, what do you guys want me to do now? I mean, I guess we'll just do what the military does really well because everybody's here. We invaded this country with a conventional military. Let's go ply our trade. Let's go hunt down everybody in the Ba'ath Party. And if there's a town that's giving these people support, never mind the fact that we just totally threw them out of the government and said they can never have jobs anymore. Let's not address that because that interferes with the political narrative. Let's just go smash that entire town. So, I mean, I love talking military tactics. I could talk them all day. There's so many little lessons we learned throughout the war on terror, especially when you start talking about using intelligence and doing, I'd say, more low visibility operations. But the biggest failures we had in the war on terror are really from the political class. And I think a lot of that goes down to the political class was never held accountable because the American people just sort of lost interest really quick with it because there's no draft. The military and the war didn't really affect people that much. But our political class and both sides of the aisle, both all commanders in chief, really up until Trump, they were really hesitant to define what they wanted the end state of the mission to look like. They
Mm.
just kind of left us over there and said, well, you know, counterinsurgency is a big deal right now. So go do counterinsurgency. Well, what happens at the end of the insurgency? You know, and why is there an insurgency? We just didn't look at those key issues
Could it be
from
because there was a
day one,
foreign?
and since then,
Is
yeah,
it was because there's a foreign occupying force? Maybe that's
yeah,
why there's
maybe,
an insurgency.
yeah,
That's
yeah. Or we told everybody in the bath party they could never have a job again, and that for weird that really made them mad.
right, right. Yes, clearly a failure to have a clearly defined goal, especially when the first goal was, maybe not entirely above board. Then you're just coming up with goals to justify the fact that why we're there, the pivot towards democracy building, whatever, after the WMD, after the nuclear inspectors had been kicked out by like all the way back to that. I mean, the idea was they were just going in somehow, going to find a way to go in. But what do you
Yeah,
think that this experience of the United States military being 2 decades fighting counterinsurgency as an occupying force in a foreign country, is that the hammer that the whole apparatus has right now? And are they looking for new counterinsurgent nails to hammer? This is one of my big concerns, is that the United States police state basically has been trained for 2 decades to root out insurgents in an occupied territory. I think some people would argue that the regime in power today is an occupying force. It's not based on our American values. It's not based on the founding principles. Are they going to use this 2 decades of counterinsurgency experience and all the technology and all this and turn it on Trump supporters, MAGA people, January Sixers? How is this going to play out? This is something I'm very concerned about.
I mean, before January, even though I was shocked by the election, shocked by the way that it went, if you would have asked me that question in December, I would have said, no, I don't really think so, Jack. I think maybe we're being a bit too conspiratorial. It's not that bad. But every single piece of data that we've seen from the Biden administration, the Biden regime, since they've come into office, and really since before that, since January 6th, the way that the narrative was driven about January 6th, that there was this murderous mob inspired by Trump that sacked the Capitol, and we've just seen that entire narrative crumble. But the initial narrative is obviously the most sticky in people's minds, and so that still exists. And then we're looking at what's going on right now with the loyalty oath being required to hold a security clearance in the military, the extremist stand down that they announced right when Secretary Austin was sworn in. Them the I thought what was very telling was the Special Operations Command diversity officer getting put in place. We've always had diversity officers. That's nothing new. But putting a guy in there who's extremely radical and leaving his social media up. It's the year 2021. You're telling me the guy didn't know to go back and delete his old tweets? Like, come on. They left his old tweets up there where he compares Trump supporters to Nazis. They left them there for a reason,
Yeah.
to let us know that they're in charge. And then I mean, look at the recent appointment of the ATF director. They could have picked any Fed. They could have picked any cop. They picked a guy that was on the ground in Waco. Well, I mean, what kind of message are they sending? And then we're looking at no fly lists, guys getting put on those. The way that they've gone after the people from January 6th, even after it's been proven that the vast majority of the people there didn't act violently at all. The timeline is just completely and totally crumbling. But again, it's right up in our face. So I do fear that all the tools that we have on the shelf that we already paid for, that the taxpayers already paid for, that are part of the security state, that are part of mass surveillance, and that are part of this counterinsurgency mentality. Now I do agree with you. I do think that we have those tools at our disposal, and there's people that are very motivated on the political side to let the people that are very motivated on the monetary and hey, now I'm relevant again, that side of the government, to go and ply their trade. I mean, that's extremely dangerous, and that's why you just need sober leaders that are going to actually hold these parts of our government, the security apparatus, hold them to task and do an oversight job. That's something that Congress and I think a lot of our elected leaders have just been completely and totally out to lunch on for 2 decades, is their oversight role.
Yeah, I'm very concerned with the language, the framing. The Biden waited longer than any president since Carter, if not further back, to do a joint session address of Congress. And there's speculation as to why he took so long, why he delayed. My speculation, pure speculation, is that they wanted to build up the January 6th case as big as they could before they went and addressed Congress so that they could use that as a way to set the national agenda. And just the other night, I heard Joe Biden say to a joint session of Congress that white supremacy is terrorism, and it is the number one domestic terror threat that we face. And all of the intelligence agencies tell us so. I'm sure it's all the same intelligence agencies that told us that Russia interfered directly in our elections, all those things, the same 19 or whatever that Hillary Clinton cited back in 2016, 2017. I just get, I see the words and the framing, and knowing what I know about critical race theory and about radical feminism and about Marxism, and reading their language and reading the words that they use, I know what they mean when they say white supremacy. They don't mean
Right.
KKK Nazi types. They mean people that believe basically in the founding principles of the United States, basically that believe in the culture that we've built here that has led us to be the most productive and richest and safest and strongest country in the history of the planet. That's what they mean when they say white supremacy. They basically mean white culture, and what they mean is American culture. And so now basically anybody that believes in individualism or punctuality or objectivity or data or working hard, they're now terrorists. How are you going to fight that notion, Joe, in Congress? What is your action plan when a guy like me, who never wanted to talk about race ever, grew up Gen
Right.
X, had no notion of racism, anything like that. It was totally a reasonable thing that we were all just living here together, as exemplified by that DMX video of him at Woodstock in 1999, where he is in front of 100,000
Yeah.
white guys, all screaming the
Right.
N-word a million times over in his song. That was like peak race relations right there. A guy like me that had no interest in race, not want to talk about it, and here I am being dragged into this discussion, kicking and screaming. We used to think it was just college kids on campuses talking a bunch of nonsense. We used to just write it off as maybe some people in media or maybe some people in universities. We even wrote it off a little bit when Kamala Harris was using the words of radical feminism during the Kavanaugh hearing at the Supreme Court or in the Congressional Judiciary Committee. But now the president of the frickin' United States of America is using CRT language in a joint session address that is meant to be parsed. It is meant to be analyzed word by word. It is very carefully constructed and written. It is officially part of the government record. They put those words in there on purpose. What do you say to a guy like me who listens to the words that they're saying and gets concerned? Very, very concerned.
Well, we all need to be concerned, because I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that for years, conservatives or even people that just weren't necessarily all that into politics, they may have heard some CRT stuff here and there. They may have heard some 1619 Project stuff here from like the crazy kids on campus or from somebody on the far, far left. And they're just like, these goofballs. Isn't that kind of funny? They went back to living their lives. But the next thing you know, that's getting put into the government. And there's a whole generation of kids that have been brought up with this stuff drilled into their heads, just in the way that, I mean, the exact opposite way that we came up in Gen X, where we knew that there was some bad parts of our racial past, but by and large we were over them, and there was this huge mesh of all cultures, but especially white and black cultures. But it's really crept into our institutions. So as an elected official, I am hoping that in 2022, this America First movement that I'm proud to be part of takes the House and the Senate back, so that we can push back at the legislative level. We can get rid of stuff like the Equality Act. We can cut off federal grants for anything that touches CRT, 1619, Planned Parenthood, because Congress controls the purse strings, and we really need to exercise that power to take away the tools, to take away the funding from the federal government to be able to implement these programs. I'd like to get rid of the Department of Education because I think that's just out of control at the federal level. So just abolish that whole thing. But for lack of being able to just totally abolish it, I would say cut off a lot of their funding that goes to CRT and all that type of stuff. If we don't take back the majority and we are limited in what we can do legislatively, it's our absolute duty to fight back as hard as we possibly can when this narrative gets put forward. So there just needs to be way more conservatives coming out and saying, hey, did you hear what Joe Biden said last night about white supremacy? Here's what white supremacy means, what you just laid out. And then here is why it's wrong. Here's why what he said is absolutely, totally wrong. And when these intelligence agencies come out and they say, oh, we totally agree that the number one threat to America is white supremacy. Okay, Congress, hold a hearing. There's something called the House Intelligence Oversight Committee. Those guys are accountable to the American people. They're accountable to the president. The president appoints them. Understand that. But Congress's oversight role, again, is in the forefront. So, I mean, my 20 years in special operations, I worked heavily with the intelligence community. When I retired from the military, I worked for the CIA for a little bit. I was a paramilitary operations officer. I've been through their training. I understand the questions to ask. I want to call these people to the carpet and have them explain to me, show me the intelligence. If we have to go into a skiff to do it, I don't think we do because I don't think it exists. But if we have to go into a secret room, so show me the secret intelligence that says that white supremacy is about ready to overthrow America, then yeah, please do. Please show me that. And then please also show me the same intelligence that said that like Russia totally swung the tide of 2016 and there was WMDs in Iraq. I want to see all that because for far too long, we have let these intelligence agencies say, hey, we know what's best for you guys. We'll tell you, but we can't say how we can't show you our math. We can't show you how we got there. You just got to trust us. And when has that worked out before? So there's a lot on the accountability side, but overall, I think it's educating people as to what these narratives mean.
Yeah. Accountability. Trust is gone. The trust me thing is gone. It's 100% gone. And you're right in the sense that we need to bring more awareness about what CRT is to regular folks. What do you say to the regular person, not the media guy, not the SJW type who calls you a racist or whatever, but what do you say to just the regular guy who is just cringes at the idea of even talking about race, right? Like to them, it's so not an issue that even talking about it makes you even kind of feel like you're the bad guy. Like, what do you just say to that regular guy in your district who doesn't have the time to figure it out, who's just working, who's catching headlines in the car and maybe at night when they're putting the kids to bed or whatever? What do you say to that regular guy? What is the story you tell him to get him on board with the things that we're talking about? Because fighting back against CRT at every level is the mission for the next however long until it's gone.
Yeah, I think for someone who's not really living this stuff and really deeply reading into it, I think you kind of just have to start out with how actually racist CRT is, because I think it's normal for people not, especially white people, let's just say it, especially for white people, like you don't really want to talk about race because like no good can come from that. I mean, you're just going to get a bunch of crap from people and then someone's going to call you racist. And I mean, I think especially if you're our age or older, like being called racist is a big deal. Like racists are actually like literally evil people, some of the darkest parts of our history. And so like when people call you a racist, man, I mean, the natural thing to do is to run away from that and be like, whatever it is I just said, I won't say it again. Just don't call me racist.
Yeah.
But I think pointing out, hey, number one, that is the intent, that they're taking these words and they are intentionally using them. I mean, I think as tragic as so many things have been in 2020, the rise of Antifa, anti-fascists, and then Black Lives Matter, and what they've done to cities, I think that makes half of our case for us. We can just say, hey, look, these guys are weaponizing language, and this is how they do it. They create an organization called Black Lives Matter, and then they burn down cities. And if you're against that, well, I guess you just don't think Black Lives Matter. It's so up in your face that I think we can use that now to help educate some people. Same thing with the anti-fascists. What are you, pro-fascists? Well, no, but why are you guys burning down cities? I mean, very reasonable people can understand this. And then I think you can get a little bit more deeper into what some of this critical race theory actually teaches about how you can never be fully anti-racist. The only people that can ever deem you as being worthy are these few people in culture that want to totally control the language. So it's really a rigged system that you can never repent enough, so that we just need to continue to repent. And really, it's not even about race. It's about uprooting the entire foundations of our country. 1619 really ties in nicely to that, where it's like we have to atone for the original sin of slavery, even though the trajectory of actual American history is the atonement of slavery. We did do that. It's an ongoing project, obviously, but our history is the fact that we did get rid of that ourselves. So I think you have to start out with what's most obvious in people's faces. And Antifa and BLM, as much as they've weaponized language, I think we can twist that right back around on them just because they've been so horrible.
Man, I have lived the BLM Antifa stuff, right? Antifa
Yeah.
came after me, doxed me when I was a nobody, a citizen, just a private citizen, doxed me, got me fired, called me a Nazi, all these things. I watched Antifa and Black Lives Matter burn Washington, D.C. I stood there literally with them throwing rocks over my head, rubber bullets coming at me this way, tear gas everywhere, 20 feet away from people looting stores, burning restaurants, 6 alarm office building fire. I mean, I watched them assault cops. I got assaulted. I mean, I've seen it all happen literally in person. I live streamed it. And when I talk to people that are normal, they still don't believe it. They don't believe that Washington, D.C. was boarded up from May 27th all the way through till January 20th, practically, because of Black Lives Matter and Antifa, not because of the Proud Boys. And they just don't understand, and they're unwilling to understand. So I am less optimistic about persuasion in that regard. And I'm more interested in offense at this point. And I'm expecting my congressional representatives and people in Congress and in the government that are on our side, who say they're on our side, to actually be much more aggressive and offensive. Trump waited a hell of a long time to get started on CRT. It might even have been specifically due to the excellent work of Christopher Rufo, who brought all kinds of attention to the matter and brought it and put it in front of the president's face. If he would have started on that day one, we could have made much more progress. What can you do? What can we do? I mean, we've talked about it. We just have to be more aggressive, man. And I think we have to be a little bit more mean. We have to be meaner.
Yeah. I mean, Antifa and BLM, they've destroyed entire cities. They've acted as terrorist organizations. They've acted as organized crime syndicates. So I think getting the federal government to actually go after these leaders, like that's another thing where Congress, if the FBI and the DOJ aren't going to do it, again, there's oversight roles there. Why isn't the FBI director on the floor of Congress right now being grilled by congressional representatives saying, hey, how come these guys aren't being targeted right now? How come I'm seeing, hey, can you help me find the random MAGA hat guy from January 6th who, walked in around the little cone that said he couldn't walk into the foyer of Congress? Like, why am I seeing that all over Twitter? But I'm not seeing, hey, can you help us identify these Antifa guys that are transiting between major cities and burning them down? I mean, those are questions that need to be asked, and Congress is the right tool to do it. But I also think, again, back to federal law enforcement grants, there's been some really disappointing local leaders who've let this stuff fester, and local law enforcement people who've let this stuff fester. But there's also some really good law enforcement agencies that have attempted to push back on this, and they've been left hung out to dry by leaders. So I think Congress allocating federal law enforcement grants directly into the hands of departments and sheriffs that will actually go out and enforce the law, I think that's another great tool that we can use. And then also cutting off federal law enforcement funding for governors that refuse to enforce law and order. Like we're in Washington State. My district's right between Portland. My major city, Vancouver, is essentially a suburb of Portland. So we've had Antifa come and encroach into our city before, but we're ran by Jay Inslee, a very activist leftist governor who refuses to deal with any of this stuff, but he still gets federal law enforcement grants. I would cut that off cold. Like, that guy does not deserve one penny of the taxpayers' dollars for law enforcement because he refuses to enforce the law.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings on that. In some regards, look, I am opposed to sanctuary cities, but I am not
Yeah.
opposed to actually rejecting federalism that you disapprove of and that you think is illegal. And there are examples of that happening on the right as well. And it's a good tactic, I think. In Virginia, when the governor there was proposing all kinds of very restrictive and infringing 2A law there was a whole network of counties and sheriffs that got together and just said, look, we're not going to enforce these laws. We're not going to enforce these laws. And that is something that I really support. I mean, I support any of the degradation of the federal power and return of power to the states. So in some, it's tough when I see the states that I disagree with doing the same thing that I do advocate for. It's sort of a mixed bag, but anything that we can to push more of the control back towards the localities, obviously, is a good thing, and I'm sure we're aligned in that regard. You brought up something that I wanted to ask you about, or we're way off topic here for my agenda. I'm going to circle back to some things in a minute, but you mentioned the police officers. How do we make sure that we're recruiting and retaining high quality police officers? I am very concerned that the overall quality of our police officers is going to decline, and that's going to be because anybody with half a brain is not going to go in. Anybody who can get out is going to get out, and the only people remaining are going to be either bootlickers of the left or people that can't get a job doing anything else. Am I wrong? And if I'm, or what do we do
No,
about
I
that?
mean, I wish you were wrong. So I know there's a pretty natural pathway from the military into law enforcement. So I know a lot of guys who made that transition over the years, but I don't know a lot that are still in law enforcement. Like a lot of these guys who were top of their game in the military, and then they wanted to get off the deployment cycle, but still serve their community, still be a protector and defender. They went into law enforcement, and a great deal of them, I think, off the top of my head, most of my friends who are special operations who went in law enforcement, they've since left because they've just said, "Hey, I can't do my job. I can't protect people, and this has just become just I can't do it anymore because I'm personally liable. These people are going to come after my family. I can't go on the offense against real bad people. We're just not allowed to do our job. So I think the state of play of law enforcement right now is pretty horrible. I mean, that's another place where I don't know if there's a good like the federal government can't come in and necessarily make these mayors and governors do the right thing, but this is a place where allocating federal funds, I think, to police departments where the police chiefs and the sheriffs really want to make a difference, like the ones you mentioned who were going to push back against the 2A infringements. We have some of those out here in my district that have pushed back against the COVID mandates, that have pushed back against Antifa encroaching into our towns, and that have pushed back against the 2A infringements as well. I mean, I would give those guys the federal law enforcement grants and not give them to these governors that are just letting anarchy take place. Give them that money, then they can actually recruit and retain high quality officers. But these places that have activist mayors and activist governors, I just don't know how you do it. I mean, that kind of goes back to your point about how I'm not a fan of the federal government either, and I do like states and cities exerting their control. The problem is when the right does it, they tend to leave everybody else alone, and there's no bleed over. Like they just live their lives. When the left does it, you get sanctuary cities that become a hub for crime, illegal immigration, and just all kinds of bad stuff, and it bleeds over into the entire state and it affects everybody else. So my district's pretty pro law and order, but we're so close to Portland that we've had plenty of bleed over coming into our city because Portland refuses to enforce any laws. So, I mean, I think just from the federal perspective, using the tools of the grant, the federal law enforcement grants, but then also pushing back on this narrative, this whole narrative that the police are systemically racist and that they're just out there hunting down young black men. There's no data to back that up. But again, we get people that they don't want to be called racist, so they immediately retreat from even having that argument. But it's an easy argument to have because the data is just not there. The police interact with black people all day long, and there's no issues, So and talk to the people in the black community. People in the black community, they want the police in their neighborhoods. It's these crazy white woke people, the elites, that are trying to defund the police. I think we just need to call that out more and fight back from it.
It is true. The studies do show, I believe, that a huge number of people, African Americans in the cities, want more police in their neighborhoods. In fact, everybody does, basically. This is a sign, though, of the problem of the tyranny of the minority, and it only takes a small handful of people to exert total control. And when you get very high leverage positions like, I don't know, the presidency, vice presidency, speaker of the House, head of all the executive departments, head of every freaking university and media company, every technology company, every search result and algorithm that's put into play. When you have high leverage like that, well, then you can really take a lot of control. And it has this perfect cover, too. If you object, you're a racist, so you don't object. It's going to take people that just don't care about being called a racist, that just don't care about being called a sexist or whatever, a white nationalist. What do these words even mean? They don't mean anything. The interesting thing is that the scorched earth tactic that they've taken has basically cleared the landscape, except for people who are immune to it. People like me, people like you. I don't care. In fact, the more that they lay it on me, the stronger I get. And so there's only guys like that out there remaining on our side now. How are we going to get more of them together? We need to get more of them together. Speaking, go ahead. You got something there?
No, I think courage is contagious. I mean, I think the more people we see when it's like, oh, they called Jack and Joe super racist because, you know, they said, hey, back in the 90s, like white people and black people got along. Aren't these guys extremists? Like, okay, let's go ahead. Let's talk about that, you know? So then I think more people are going to be like, oh, wait, this is absolute insanity. So I think that helps. I think social media, where you talked about getting in and breaking up these technocrats and the control that they have over all of our lives, I think that's critical. I don't think we're going to be able to fight back against this until we take a strong stance against the monopoly they have over information.
Yes, it is a new paradigm where the control of information is concentrated in the old days, it was concentrated in the hands of a few people in the old days, right? Walter Cronkite and such. And then there was this moment, Cambrian explosion of independent media creators, and we're still experiencing that to some degree, but we can see the end game. We can see how the walls are closing in and people are getting picked off on the fringes, and maybe one day they'll come for me. I hope not, but I'm prepared for it if that were to happen. And you're kind of expecting it, even though you don't want it to happen. But solving that technology problem is going to be huge. Somebody's going to have to go in there and actually advocate for the right stuff and not be beholden to the lobbyists and the corporations. I hope that is going to be you. You talked about getting the right kind of people together. Who will you caucus with once you're elected? Who's going to be your squad, your team up there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple really good fighters out there that I really like right now. Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think, is doing a great job of just being completely and totally unapologetic about everything that left throws at her. And what I really like about her is that she doesn't just call things out. She does a great job of calling things out and explaining them, but she also proposes counter legislation. I mean, she knows it's going to get shot down now because of the control the Democrats have over the House. But she not only calls out the shenanigans the left's trying to do, but she says, hey, here's an alternative. And then she also uses the parliamentary procedures such as roll call votes against what the left's doing and against really the establishment Republicans, because her saying like, wait a sec, no, I call for a roll call vote because everybody needs to put their name on this so that their constituents know how they voted. I think that's beautiful. So I'm big fan of what she's doing. Matt Gaetz, I think for a long time has gotten a lot of stuff really right. He's been really, really good on endless wars. I really appreciate how he's been unapologetic and outspoken about that. Thomas Massey, obviously, is a breath of fresh air. Mo Brooks, hopefully he makes it into the Senate. I'm a huge Ron and Rand Paul fan. And then just generally the House Freedom Caucus, I think that those America First type of policies are the people that I want to associate with and help strengthen their message.
Man, I had a crazy experience with Rand Paul. It was the night of the Republican National Convention, and they had the party at the White House, and there was all these people leaving the White House and getting harassed and accosted by the crowds. And so I spent the whole night like guiding people from the White House to their hotels and keeping them away from the mob. And as I was getting ready to go, there was Rand Paul and his wife and a couple of other people were like just getting out of a car, and like they had to get to their hotel, and there was a big mob in the way, and they were starting to walk up, and I saw him and I ran over there and I was like, no, 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 you cannot go this way. And they're like, why? What's going on? I'm like, there's a mob over here. They're going to get you. And so
Yeah.
we were able to like secure them and get one police officer over there, and then the mob surrounded them and were grabbing at them, grabbing at their clothes. One grabbed a lady's shoe and was throwing her shoe around and like pulling at their dresses and yelling and screaming things. It was awful. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's just, man, just being on
Horrible
the
to see in
street.
America.
It's a horrible thing to see. It's a horrible thing to see, and people still don't believe it is the is the problem. So we just keep doing it and keep putting this information out there. I'm glad you mentioned Thomas Massey. He's another one of those roll call vote guys, and boy, did that
Yeah.
piss people off. It pissed Trump off even until I think he realized why he had done it, why he called people to come back and vote in person. So that
Yeah.
people had to be accountable for voting up or down on the that bill, that big bill that was in question. I think it was one of the first Corona packages, maybe. So Thomas Massey would be great. How? What did you learn in the military about a leadership style? In the Liminal Order, we do a lot of leadership training. We have guys, special forces guys, tier 1 guys come and train us up on their leadership styles and their ideas that they learn in the Marines and other places. We found that what we've learned there to be very effective. Do you have a particular leadership style that you were raised in or that you found to be effective that you're going to be able to use to rally these people like Marjorie and Thomas Massey and these other folks into a formidable force?
Yeah. So it's hard to put my finger on exactly on how I would describe my leadership style. I think leading by example is very powerful, just in general in life, because people are always going to look to see if you walk the walk and not just talk the talk. I think that's huge. But also being, I call it, and this is kind of like a lefty sort of word, so some people like laugh at me, but I say like an inclusive leader, because when you're working with high quality, high talented people like we do in special operations. So my entire career was in special operations. I was always leading a sort of a pirate ship organization, if you will, because SOF is very much like, hey, can you back it up? And if you can't, some other alpha is going to come in there and completely and totally eat your lunch. And that's just the way it is. So if you come in there, bowed up, doing the traditional military, like I'm in charge, hands on the hips, you guys are going to listen to me because I outrank you. Like it just doesn't work. And Congress doesn't work that way. And real life doesn't work that way. So I think being able to go and assess what people's strengths are and put them towards that strength and build a cohesive team. And I think that that methodology ties in very nicely with being a congressman, because you have to stay connected with the people at every corner of your district. My district is huge. We have rural issues, we have urban issues, and you have to know all those issues intimately. And you also have to know who you can call and who you can count on to give you the honest ground truth so that you can take that back to Washington, D.C., armed with knowledge and understand what part of the federal government that ties into, if there is a tie, and how you can best meet the needs of your constituents. And then also building that coalition of people that you have in Congress that you know are going to have your back. I mean, that's a place where you just need to understand where you're going to be value added, and then understand where they're going to be value added to you. I think a lot of my experience in the military and then in the intelligence community is going to greatly benefit, I think, the America First agenda, because I think there's a lot of people in the, I mean, we call it the deep state, which is a, all inclusive word, but just in the permanent government class, that they run a roughshod over elected leaders, because a lot of the elected leaders that don't come from government, they hear all these acronyms, and there's these generals that come in and talk at them, and there's these like spooky CIA, NSA dudes that come in and talk to them, and they're just like, I don't know, man, whatever you say, because I've just been overwhelmed with information that I can't really verify. So I think being able to come in and say, hey, I'm from that world, but I'm also from that part of the world that never really left the ground level. I think that's how I kind of tie in nicely to this movement that we're building in the America First movement.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Very interesting. You're going to have to put together a team. You're going to have to build an organization. You're going to have to build institutions. I'm not telling you something you don't know already. That was one of the number one problems of the Trump administration. I just had Darren Beatty and Amanda Milius on, both of them Trump staffers. And we had a very honest and introspective reflection on the presidency. Obviously, all three of us were big Trump supporters. We would vote for him again. We would do it all over again, even harder. starting back in 2015. No regrets, none. But it's time for a postmortem. And one of the things that comes up consistently is a failure to build infrastructure, not roads, but of people and institutions and organizations and a team of people. Sebastian Gorka and I were on a show together a couple months ago, and he said, look, we needed 5,000 people. We only had like 100. There's just not that many people out there that have accurately assessed the circumstances and are ready to get on board. Or are there? Or are they just untapped? Or have we just not reached them? What's your vision? What do you see? What do you see for this institution building element and solving the problem where we had a president who had the mandate from his party and all of us, but then was physically, bureaucratically unable to enact his agenda? What's the solution?
I think initially,
I
think initially it's going to take some scorched earth. I mean, I think the right answer eventually, yeah. I mean, my biggest criticism of Trump, and I love Trump, I will vote for him again in a heartbeat, supported him, had plans to work in a second Trump administration. My biggest criticism is he should have fired more people, and he should have fired them a lot faster. Because it's very clear that the commander in chief is in charge of the vast majority of the federal government. Obviously the executive branch, but the federal government includes the executive branch includes most of the federal government. So when people weren't implementing his policies, or they're giving him DC swamp uniparty doublespeak, they just should have been shown the door, thank for their service, and say, okay, bye. Like, you serve at the pleasure of the president. That's just the way it is. We can't go quite that scorched earth in Congress, but being able to really find the right people, I think, is going to be key. Again, this is kind of where I think I'm a little bit unique, because my time in the federal government was pretty much spent on the ground level fighting these wars. There are a lot of really good Americans out there in the military and the intelligence community and throughout the federal government that are similar to me. They spent their time on the ground. They weren't DC guys. They weren't trying to climb the rank and get a political appointee job, or trying to line up their next sweet gig at a think tank when they got out, or a defense contracting institution when they got out. They were just, nose to the grindstone, trying to actually make a difference. There's those guys out there, but a lot of them get beat down, and they think that, well, I'm never going to become this political guy, so whatever, man, I'll just retire and punch out and go back to my hometown. We need to find those people. I know a lot of them. I want to bring them into government, but I do think there's going to be some scorched earth of when people don't do what the commander in chief says, and when they start going against the Constitution, they need to be called out and they need to be fired. I mean, I think the second, or was the second, the first Trump impeachment, the whole Ukraine thing, if you were paying attention, you saw a lot of how the deep state thinks, because there was people there that went, under oath, and with a straight face testified, like Colonel Vindman, and then even the State Department guy, who I unfortunately share a last name with, but no relation. They would say things with a straight face, like, well, the president of the United States violated the policy of the United States. It's like, well, no, that's not how it works, man. Like, the people elected the president enacted policy. You're just there to literally turn the knobs and do what he says. But there is this culture in DC that the permanent class, the permanent bureaucrats, they really run things. These politicians that just come in, they don't know what's going on. And I think that's just led to so many of our problems. And then the politicians get brought into the fold, like around the 8 to 10 year mark, where they're just pretty much owned by the special interests who get them elected. And it's just this corrupt, disgusting system that we need to call out and just, I think, go scorched earth on.
I like scorched earth. It's necessary. I've been saying that conservatives need to become the party of change. I know that sounds kind of funny, but it's true. You know why? Because there's nothing left to conserve. You know why? Because they won.
Yeah.
They won.
You're right. Yeah.
The slow march through the institutions ended 2 nights ago when Joe Biden barfed up CRT bull crap in front of a joint session of Congress. White supremacy is terrorism. That is the final conclusion of the long march through the institutions, the capstone event, the most highest visibility moment for the president of his term, and one of his top 5 highest visibility moments of his entire term, is when he went all the way. He went full send, as the kids say. And that's very troubling to me, very troubling. Now, you've mentioned a couple times America first. I know we have mutual in common, Matt Brainerd. Matt Brainerd came on my show very early on with real hard data on Arizona and Georgia and a few other places. And I don't want to tempt fate here, but I've had those videos up on YouTube with no strikes, no nothing, fully monetized. Why? Because Matt Brainerd speaks truth and he has facts that even YouTube can't get on. So tell me, you're working with Matt Brainerd. How did you guys get together? What's the vision? Where are we going, Joe?
So I was contacted by Matt very luckily. So I'd followed Matt's work for quite a while, really ever since November 3rd went the way that it did. I saw a lot of crazy voices out there that were talking about all the conspiracy theories. And then there was Matt and a handful of others, but really Matt saying, "Hey, we can prove this. Like we're going to run it down. We're going to show how we got here. We're going to show our receipts, and we want to open up the books and we want to prove that there was election fraud because of the way that this election was structured with the unrequested, mail out ballots." So I followed him. Really, he spoke to the analytical side of my brain, and I think that's the argument that we need to have right now for election integrity. So when I started messing around with this idea of running for Congress, going out and talking to people throughout my entire district, the first thing on everyone's mind is the election of 2020. And they say to me, "Hey, are we ever going to have free and fair elections again? Are we ever going to adjudicate what happened in 2020? And this is people from all walks of life. I'm in the heart of timber country. These are lumberjacks. These are professional fishermen. These are business people, entrepreneurs. Doesn't matter. All their normal key issues out the window. What are we going to do about the election of 2020? So when Matt reached out to me, I was really excited that Matt Brainerd had contacted me. And I was like, "Hey man, like if I'm going to bring on anybody who understands how, DC works and the political side works, it has to be somebody who is aligned with my ideology, but then also knows that November 3rd is one of the biggest issues that we have right now that still needs full adjudication." So I, work closely with Matt, and the plan is, when we get in and we retake the House, when we retake the Senate, we need to have full congressional hearings on what happened in November of 2020 and have actual experts like Matt Brainerd come in and present the receipts. A lot of that's starting to take place right now with what's going on in Maricopa County, a lot of the data that's coming out of Georgia. But unfortunately, all the checks that we were supposed to have on our election, everybody who's responsible for those, they shirked their duties like cowards. And so again, should it be Congress? I don't know, but Congress seems like the last great hope for us to actually have a hearing where people raise their right hand and go on oath and go on the record, and we subpoena witnesses, we subpoena evidence, and we just lay it all out for the American people. And if the left wants to fight us on that, that's fine. They can fight us on that, but we're willing to show our math on this one because of guys like Matt. So I'm very excited to be working with him, and I'm excited for what's coming in 2022, and we lay it all out for the American people.
All right, so tell us what is the plan? The election you're running, your election is in November of 2022. What district are you in? Who's the incumbent? Are you primarying somebody? What is the deal? What's going on with your district? Let's get some details.
Yeah, so Washington 3 is the district. And just so for people, we're right on the Oregon-Washington border. So we're on the north side of the Columbia River, southwest Washington. We go all the way out to the Pacific Ocean. We're the only red district on the west coast that touches the Pacific Ocean. And then we go all the way, yeah, pretty crazy. Everybody always thinks Pacific Northwest, this hotbed, but right in the middle, there's this one sliver of red. And then we go all the way about 200 miles east along the Columbia River Valley Gorge into kind of more agricultural country. We are in the heart of timber country. So we're traditionally a Republican stronghold. Our representative for the last 10 plus years has been Jamie Herrera Butler. She voted for the impeachment of Trump. That's really what triggered me to get in the race and kind of get back into public service because by her voting for the impeachment of President Trump, she really painted an X on our district because we are right between Portland and Seattle, as we previously discussed. We're the only section of red that touches the Pacific Ocean. The left really wants to control this area to pretty much link their failing cities of Portland, Olympia, and Seattle to give them total control of this I-5 sector, Interstate 5. So it's strategic key ground. And then by her switching sides and showing that she could be manipulated by the left's narrative, she pretty much put open season on us. She was already a weak representative before. She voted to stop the construction of the border wall. She just voted for amnesty for a bunch of illegal immigrants hidden inside of a farming bill. She voted for Obamacare. She was very silent as Antifa encroached into towns in her district. She's been a weak Republican for a very, very long time. So the straw that broke the camel's back was the vote for impeachment. So we're a heavily conservative district. We have a good deal of Trump supporters. So the ground game so far is to get out to as many counties in the district as I possibly can, meet as many people as I can, start to build my team of local experts on all the different issues that affect our district so that I can speak knowledgeably about the issues and I know what really matters to people. But again, what people have told me the most is that, hey, election integrity, we have to adjudicate the election of 2020. And then we actually have to have people that are going to go fight for us. I mean, Representative Butler and traditional Republicans, they come and they do these transactional deals where they're like, oh, for the district, I put in an earmark in this bill and I got us an extra salmon fishery. I got us a salmon ladder that goes over a bridge. It's these very transactional things. Meanwhile, the Republic is essentially burning and they say nothing, until it's time for them to be in the minority. And then they try and raise funds on whatever. They'll go on Fox News and say, isn't it crazy that Democrats want open borders? Go to my Win Red and give me some money. But then when they're in power and they could do something, they're like, well, I don't know if Trump really needs to build the border wall. So people have seen that these weak Republicans get us nowhere but pushed over. So that's my message to people is that I will go and I will fight for them. And it's our time to have our voices heard, because if we don't do it now, it's just going to be too late.
To me, you don't sound extreme at all. To me, you sound right on point. I think to some other folks, you might sound a little extreme. Has anybody tried to give you advice to like temper your message a little bit, or to just not be so, I don't know, authentic?
I mean, working with Matt has helped that a lot, because Matt's an authentic guy. And so he's like, the biggest mistake politicians make is they try to be someone else. And I'm like, well, that's good, because I don't think I'd be able to do that very well. But the big thing is people, they see someone who's primarying a Republican from the right, and they're like, oh my God, he's got to be this extremist guy. And the way I lay it out now is I'm like, hey, there's lots of different nuances in policy, and I want to discuss all those. But the fight right now is very simple. There's one side that wants complete and total control of your life. And if you disagree, they will cancel you. You will be removed from social media. They'll put you on a no-fly list. And then there's the rest of us. And we want people to have their freedoms back. And we want them to be able to go about their lives and have the government stay out of their lives. And if you want to have a conversation about something, we're open to it. That's how simple it is right now. I mean, it's not a complicated choice anymore.
Yeah, no, I say go full authentic. I just wanted to make sure that people aren't chirping in your ear about it or saying tone it back or anything like that. I say go for it. We'll get that social media fired up for you too. Get those tweets up to speed and get all those videos out there. The video that you released was very powerful. I strongly suggest everybody go watch it. Joe, if people want to support you, if they want to give you money, if they want to mail envelopes for you, make phone calls, knock on doors, whatever, what can they do and how can they find you?
So they can go to joekentforcongress.com. They can read about all my stances on all the issues there. They can send me an email directly, sign up to be a volunteer. And if they can, I really need as many donations as I can possibly get, because right now we're running off all individual donations, no PAC money. And then also we're up against the establishment. So the Lincoln Project and that cast of characters, they love Jamie Herrera Butler, and they're already pumping money into the district. And then we have the far left from Portland and Seattle that wants to pump money into the district too. So we're up against a pretty formidable enemy as far as money goes. But luckily, truth's on our side, and I know enough people out there want to see this movement come to fruition and us take the House and the Senate back. So if they can make a donation, I'd really appreciate it.
Please do, guys. Make a donation. Support Joe Kent, primarying somebody who voted to impeach President Trump, and the second one based on the bullcrap January 6th nonsense about the most violent armed insurrection threat against democracy since the Civil War. Yeah, right. That's
led by the MAGA shaman.
Right, exactly. That's a shame that she did that, and a shame that you're fighting against the left at the same time too. That should tell you everything you need to know about the incumbent there in your district. Do you think you'll get the big endorsement from the man himself?
I'm optimistic about it, but I am working every day like I'm in second or third place. So, from what I know of President Trump, I interacted with him a couple times. He likes to see people work hard, and he likes to see people win. So, if people want to see me win, they can definitely help me out with donations. And until I get that endorsement, and even after I get that endorsement, it's my job just to run like I'm in second and third place. So, I'm hoping he sees the work that I'm putting in. But I'm trying to do everything I can to just get out there and actually just put the work in.
As you said, courage is contagious. Run through a brick wall, turn around, you'll see there will be people behind you. That is one of my leadership styles that I like to implement. Joe, it's been really great getting to know you, man. I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show, and I hope we can stay in touch over the next however many years. Hopefully, it is. Well, not too many because you believe in term limits, but hopefully,
Exactly.
hopefully it's a number of years where we can actually get some things accomplished and make some change and fight back for the people of your district and for the people of the United States at large, because we need it, and we need more voices like yours. We need people who are willing to say the truth. Yikes. To just speak plainly about what the other party and the other people are saying plainly themselves. So good on you, dude, for being brave enough to just speak the truth, which sounds like a crazy thing to say, but in this day and age, we know that truth speaking is actually an act of courage. So thank you very much, Joe. I really appreciate it, man. Let's stay in touch. I'm sure we will. I had a great time. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me on, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, man. Guys, go follow Joe. What's your Twitter handle so people can follow you?
It's just Joe Kent, 16 JAN 19.
What's the relevance there? 1619.
That's the day that my wife was killed in Syria.
Sorry to hear that. I understand why you would memorialize that. That is a tough one to end on there. Really sorry, sir. Thank you so much for your service, your multiple tours, your work with the government, your future work here, the ultimate sacrifices that you and your family have made in the name of freedom in America around the world. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And with that, I'm going to skip out on all the normal promo stuff because let's just end it on there, guys. I appreciate you joining the stream. I appreciate you being here. Come back next week, guys. And Joe, thanks so much, buddy. And we are out.